Hi, you're listening to Marcia Pally and conversations I'm having with people about the criteria we should use to design and implement our economic and political policies. What should be our basic framework for determining public policy? These conversations are based on ideas from a book of mine, Commonwealth and Covenant, Economics, Politics, and Theologies of Relationality, because we're looking specifically at relationality as this framework for policy. Relationality includes both the individual person and the relations and contexts that he or she is in. Relationality is developed in many of our philosophical traditions and also in several theological traditions. Whether you think theologies are the word of the divine or an illuminating metaphor, in both cases they offer us much about how the world and people work, and so about the policies that will lead to the greatest human flourishing. Please join us in this series of conversations. Commonwealth and Covenant was published by Erdman's Press in 2016. You can follow me at marciapally.com or search for me on Facebook and Twitter. Most of the readings are from Commonwealth and Covenant, Economics and Politics and Theologies of Relationality, which I wrote and was just published last month. However, there are some writings from other authors as well, and in each chapter there are many quotes from other authors with complete footnotes. So any author that you find is particularly stimulating, you can follow up on that author by simply going to the library and looking for the article or the book that the quote is taken from. The idea was to explain what relational theologies are, and to explain it by hearing the voices of many people who write and have thought in this tradition. So we have people from the Protestant traditions, the Catholic tradition, the Jewish tradition, some from the Muslim tradition, but mostly Christian and Jewish traditions, in order to bring many voices to help us understand the concepts and the application of relationality, which is a theological idea applied to the public sphere. Then we'll plunge in. So as I've said, the purpose of this seminar is to discuss relational theologies as a framework for the public sphere, policies in economics, politics, and society in general. The basic principle is that philosophical and theological principles can help us design and develop and implement policies that foster human flourishing. So the theological principles that we're going to be focusing on, what's called relational theologies or theologies of relationality, begin with the idea that we humans are distinct, separate individuals, each of singular and equal worth, in God's image, you might say, each of equal value and separate and distinct. Yet we become who we uniquely are through layers of relationships that we have throughout our lives, starting in earliest childhood. So this is a little bit different from we have relationships and we are separate, or we are distinct individuals. It's more the idea that you don't get to be the unique person that you are, except through all the interactions and relations that are in your lives. Think of a small child, right? Developing into a unique person through the interactions with people near, family, community, and then extending out because the educational opportunities, the economic opportunities, your nutrition, healthcare, all affect the person you're going to develop into. And those are determined by people not necessarily so near to you, physically or in relationship, but nonetheless, you are in relation with them. They have an impact on you, and as you become an adult, you will have an impact on them in the public sphere through politics and so on, with community organizing and so on. So one of the basic theological principles is that we become who we uniquely are through layers and layers of interaction and relationship. When we disregard this dual quality that we have, this separateness, this separability, this uniqueness and singularity, and yet our embeddedness in our situations, when we disregard this dual quality, we end up with too much of one or too much of the other. Separability in appropriate amounts yields indispensable things such as innovation and freedom to follow opportunity and change one's way of thinking and living, because you can separate from your past, from what your parents did, and create, be creative, innovative, move physically and move ideationally, move in your ideas, your beliefs, the way you see the world. It is the basis for human rights and civil rights that are guaranteed to each person regardless of background or station. You don't have human rights because of who your aunt or your uncle are. You have them because of who you are individually, your separate, unique self. The idea of being a separate, unique person undergirds, as the British philosopher Gillian Rose said, both the person who thinks and acts unconventionally and laws that guarantee her rights to act unconventionally. Yet, with all these indispensable and very valuable things, that separability and distinctiveness ground us, excesses of separability yield abandonment, amory, alienation, self-absorption, greed. Because in excess of being separate, you think about not only thinking about yourself, but thinking about only yourself, seeing yourself as quite separate from everybody else. This leads, unfortunately, to an adversarial stance in politics, resource grabbing. I'm going to grab as much resources for myself. I don't care about anybody else. Political corruption. I'm going to get the most for me and mine. And business and stock market cheating. It's also a recipe for talent wasted by alienation and poverty that limits or destroys our ability to act together for the life that we live in common. And all those people who are abandoned and who do not have resources coming their way, all of the talent and intellect and creativity of those people is wasted for society as well. The economic effects of too much separability were noted in the middle of the 18th century by Adam Smith, the supposed guru of greed, who complained that the new industrialization of early capitalism made workers dull, destroyed communities, vitiated morality, fostered anonymous cities, and allowed the flamboyant rich to corrupt everybody else. Interestingly, the ills of too much separability were expressed much more recently by David Frum, a Republican conservative in the United States and speechwriter for George W. Bush, who wrote in 2011 this critique of the Republican Party and its self-absorption. He wrote, "In the face of evidence of dwindling upward mobility and long-standing middle-class stagnation of middle-class wages, my party's economic ideas sometimes seem to have shrunk to just one idea: more tax cuts for the very highest earners." And that comes from a Republican conservative noticing that his party had gone too far into the self-absorption of separability. And we have a kind of tragicomic reflection of what happens with too much separability in the list of these films. The Wolf of Wall Street, 1929, Wall Street, 1987, Wall Street Warriors, 2006, Wall Street, Money Never Sleeps, 2010, Margin Call, 2011, and again, The Wolf of Wall Street, 2013. Each one of those films looking at excesses of self-absorption and greed. Because with persistent focus on separating, on the exit from common concerns and projects, one might well come to think only of oneself or one's firm or one's political party, and to assume that everybody else is doing the same. This was the diagnosis of Thomas Hobbes, that the fear of grabbing by others, that other people are going to grab what you need, leads one to inconsolable competition. And the results are what Charles Taylor and Glenn Stassen have called the buffered self. Larry Rasmussen calls it detached individualism. Luke Brotherton refers to it as isolated choosers. And Pope Francis called it said that it leads to a throwaway society where large numbers of people are considered disposable products if they are thought about at all. Politically, the focus on the exit from our common concerns and common future yields suspicion of societal projects and government per se. In a culture of self-concern, government, the largest agent of common effort, is mistrusted. Common effort is mistrusted, and therefore government, the agent of common effort, is mistrusted most of all. As the enforcer of common responsibilities, taxes, market regulations, environmental protections, and so on, government can be seen as the foe of freedom, when freedom means the freedom to focus on yourself. The excessive separability that we see in the West today actually began in early modernity. With the scientific and technological revolutions came substantial gain in our control of nature, to the benefit of greater health and prosperity. Yet, an unintended consequence was a shift in worldview from our being in nature, situated in our environments and in interaction with all else in the natural world, to our being on top of nature, on top of things. Think of the idiom, I'm on top of it. Separated from one's surroundings and in control. Our appreciation of interconnectedness with person's world thinned and was replaced by various sorts of nominalism, a fascination with the human mind and its ability to change what things mean. For example, to change unpredictable nature into a controllable tool, controllable by the human mind. In short, control yielding an inflated sense of self-sufficiency yielded undue and excessive separability, a focus on the self and how one can further control one's surroundings for one's own benefit. This early modern tendency came along simultaneously, hand in glove, with all the benefits of early modernity, all the magnificent scientific and technological and sociological innovations, the growth of individual rights, the improvements in medicine and in health. So I'm not suggesting that early modernity is a culprit, but rather the truth about cultures, that most things in cultures that go on have both positive and negative outcomes. There isn't a bad British culture and a good British culture, or a bad German culture and a good German culture, or a bad Japanese culture and a good Japanese culture, a bad Peruvian culture or a good. It's that cultural aspects happen all at once and have both positive and negative outcomes. This was true of the shifts in early modernity. And with advances in improved transportation and economic opportunities that made for much wealth and rising standard of living in early modernity, It also created an increasingly mobile populace, further disembedding persons from place and relationships and reinforcing a kind of self-reliance and do what you can to further yourself. And a thinning of the embeddedness of one's own future with the future of others and one's surroundings. All of that said about separability. On the other hand, too much situatedness or embeddedness, tight group embeddedness with few individual options or freedoms is equally unproductive. Situatedness also has good things for us: security, support, affection. It enables cooperative projects that sustain our physical and socio-economic infrastructures. Yet, untempered by separability, it yields oppressive control, which is situatedness top-down, or stultifying conformity, riddled with snooping and prejudice, situatedness from the crowd. In short, situatedness, as a productive social force, should not be confused with situation in only one's ancestral group, because there's no separability at the same time. If you are locked into the past or into your ancestral setting. It also produces what we call old boys networks, and where groups in society who are not in traditional places of opportunity can't get in. It creates a kind of societal stasis. In light of our discussion, I'd like to propose some questions that we might think about and relate the material we discussed to our own lives. When we think about the basic features of human life, separability amid situatedness, consider your life since childhood. Who are the people who have influenced your growth and development? Which organizations have provided or influenced your education, nutrition, healthcare, opportunities to meet people or job opportunities, and so on? Where are these people and organizations located? How far does the impact we have on each other extend? When we think about excessive separability and excessive situatedness, too much of one or too much of the other, consider things you think are going wrong where you live, in your country or in the larger world. Can you trace any of them to excessive separability, to thinking only or mostly about oneself, one's business, one's political party, and not taking into account how the situation is for the other people involved? Can you trace any of them to excessive situatedness, to tight controls from authorities, or pressures to conform to a group? Can you trace any of them to both of these? Consider the woman who said, "My husband and I both have jobs we like, but our salaries don't rise in proportion to rising costs, so we can't keep up with the bills, let alone save for our kids' college educations, where tuition is also rising." Can any of this be traced to excessive separability or situatedness, or both?